Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of SteelRoses podcast. This podcast was created for women by women. I'm so happy to have you all here with us today. I am very excited. I have a really wonderful guest here with us today. We have Maggie Birge-Caracappa. Maggie, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jenny.
Maggie, why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself, your story, and we can just kind of dive in.
Sure. So I am a 44-year-old bisexual nerd about town. I have been married for the last 6 years to a wonderful woman. My first marriage, so I'm very excited about that. Hopefully my last marriage. I don't want any more marriages. Just the one is enough. I have 4 cats. They're all terrible and I love them dearly. And I just recently started exploring kind of my gender nonconformity, non-binary status a little bit in terms of, how I present myself to the world, how I move about in the world. I am a LGBTQ plus activist, human rights activist, and fat activist. I actually refer to myself as a fat liberationist. My interests go beyond just body positivity and body neutrality, which are all wonderful, great goals and movements, into actually sort of dismantling fat phobia and fat stigma, on a systemic level. So beyond the individual and into the systemic. So that's me.
I think, and I want you to talk a little bit more about the fat advocacy, and I know body positivity is there, but you had given me this really great resource, and I actually want to kind of bring this around to the listeners. So when Maggie and I first connected, we talked about a bunch of topics, and she pointed me towards this particular organization, the National Association to Advance Fat Acceptance. Now, when Maggie and I talked about it, we were talking through the stigma of being obese or the stigma of being overweight and what that really means. And if you haven't been in the position, then you'll never know that there's actual limitations that are set in place by society, by manufacturers, just in general for people who are obese because of whatever reasons it's there. The organization that you had pointed me to, I actually did research on that site and I started reading through it.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't realize the history there. So do you want to talk a little bit about that? 'Cause you know what much more than me on that. So.
Well, actually the history of the organization, I don't know that well. I mean, I did take a little memory assistance trip back through it to find out more and to realize that it's been around for over 50 years, almost 55 years now. It started in 1969, along with, it makes a lot of sense that this organization would have started around the same time as sort of the height of all the other civil rights movements, women's rights and racial rights and civil rights for LGBTQ plus people, all kind of happening at the same time. There's this sort of nexus of activism that historically happened around the same time. So what this organization is really trying to do is, like I said, work on that systemic level of allowing fat people to live in our bodies without having to conform ourselves to a very narrow, arbitrary sense of what a normal body is. Fat bodies have always been here. Fat bodies will always be here. And it's really difficult to walk around the world sometimes in a fat body for various reasons. And the hardest thing, I think, is accessing healthcare. And the thing about fat liberation is it's intersectional. It intersects with civil rights. It intersects with Black rights. It intersects with women's rights. It intersects with gay rights. There's no human right that doesn't affect other human rights. There's no one group that if they win something, it doesn't mean a win for other people. So that's kind of, where things are. And the national organization is I don't think it's as well known as it could be. Like, you'd never heard of it. I think most people haven't heard of it. And if you're not fat, even fat people haven't heard of it. It's something that's kind of like, it's starting to gain more traction and is becoming a wider movement. And they have a great campaign out right now for size freedom. And what that is really, not making sure that on a state level right now, hopefully maybe one day it would be on a federal level, but right now on a state level, that fat people can't be discriminated against for housing and for other forms of accessibility. We are a protected class. We are considered a disabled class, which I have my own issues with, but it's still legal in most states for housing to be denied to people who require it. So then we're talking about people who are in poverty, who require housing to be subsidized by the government. If you're fat, you can be denied that access. So it's that's like, and that's just one small part of it. As for my, speaking from my own personal experience, I had a knee replacement surgery 2 years ago, almost exactly 2 years ago. It was December 1st, 2021. And when I told people like, oh, hey, I'm getting my knee replaced, I'm so excited. I had torn my meniscus. I've had chronic arthritis for over a decade, very painful joints in both knees. And this meniscus tear was kind of like, all right, this is sort of the excuse my orthopedist and I needed to go ahead and do this knee replacement. At the time I was 42, which is pretty young for a knee replacement, kind of in general. Like most knee replacements, people get them between like 50 and 80. They tend to be kind of a later in life surgery, but anyone of any age can have their knee replaced. So when I told, friends and family, like, oh, hey, I'm getting my knee replaced. This is going to be great. It's going to change my life. It's going to be, in so much less pain. And I got horror story after horror story of, my husband needs a knee replacement and his doctor told him he needs to lose 50 pounds before he'll do the surgery. My friend needed a knee replacement and they were told they need to lose 150 pounds before they can do the surgery. And this, that, and the other thing. And my mother, who also needed a knee replacement, was told the same thing. She was overweight, obese, quote unquote obese, which is a medical category. And she was told she needed to lose in excess of 100 pounds before the doctor would do her surgery. And, it's this sort of oxymoronic thing because you are restricted in your ability to move and you're restricted in your ability to, find exercise and outlets. And so the only thing you can do is starve yourself, which has a lot of negative consequences. And I looked into it after I sort of got my knee replacement or was about to get my knee replacement. It was like, what did the doctors actually say? What does the actual medical community say? And they're like, yeah, there's no weight restrictions. It's literally physician preference. And there's so much anti-fat bias in the medical community. And that's just one way in which it manifests. So I count myself very, very lucky that I had a surgeon who didn't care how much I weighed and said, your knee is busted. You need a new one. We need to do this. And this is going to be, and it's going to improve your overall health. And it has, my mobility is better. My strength is better. I will eventually need to get my other knee replaced. But because I've gotten the busted one done, I can work on strengthening that knee and kind of babying it along until it's absolutely necessary for me to get it replaced. And it's just one example, and it's one personal example that once I started talking about it was like, oh yeah, we've all had a whole bunch of people in my life that I'm connected to had this experience.
I had shared with Maggie when we were chatting before we decided to record together, a similar in experience, not in situation, when I was having my kids. I've always been, I guess I'm medically obese. It's always been there. It's just there because Lord knows I can't fit into that little bucket.
Yeah, those numbers keep changing.
Oh, forget about it.
The BMI. So I could do a whole podcast on why BMI is a ridiculous measure, but literally they changed the level several years ago, like what was considered obese, and people woke up, suddenly finding themselves medically obese.
You're like, what happened?
It's like when they went to bed, they were normal, and they came out, they woke up in the morning and they were obese. It's like, wait a second.
And I don't want the listeners to get confused in the sense that, like, I'm not promoting like, oh, we should all be like obese, or we should all, I'm not saying like, oh, it's good, but I'm just saying like if you are, then like there shouldn't be discrimination against you, because you're still a person. Like,
yeah,
if and that's really where people don't realize it. I myself didn't even realize it until I was in situations where, like, when I was having my son, I was forced into having a C-section with my son because I was considered obese at the time. Now, it wasn't actually, it wasn't that bad, but like in the eyes of the doctor, they were just like, oh, you know what? Like, let's just go for the C-section. Once you're in that situation, you're in the hospital and you want your baby to come, like you're kind of just going to go with it. But after I left the hospital, what I had shared with Maggie was that I had this like just bad feeling, like I had not been treated properly. And that, like, I felt like when I was in there that they had basically treated me like a cow. And like, I was kind of just like, there was no bedside manner. And the nurse was very like huffy with me and just kind of annoyed. And I remember like, asking her to, they were prepping me for the C-section. So they were, doing the catheter and everything like that. And I was like, oh, I want my husband to leave the room. Like, let me have some privacy. And she was just like, well, I don't understand. Like, if he's going to be in there for the delivery, like, this is ridiculous. And it was like very like, rude in general. And then it's just like, even in there themselves, like I had been very excited to, have my kids, and I was pushed into a particular pathway of a C-section because of my weight. And I didn't realize that until after the fact. And afterwards, I was feeling kind of crappy about what happened. And I started looking things up online, and it turns out like I'm not the only one. And when you are overweight and you go into that hospital to have your baby, 9 times out of 10, you're not going to be treated that great simply because of your weight. And there's other scenarios too, where like outside of healthcare, like healthcare is a big one. Like literally, that's huge.
Yeah, access to healthcare for fat people is a really, really big obstacle, for sure.
Let's take a quick break.
Are you interested in podcasting but not sure where to start? My name is Jenny Benitez, and I'm here to help guide you through your podcast launch and maintenance. Check out the link in the episode description for Podcasting Unboxed, your comprehensive startup guide. I am very excited to work with you. Yeah, it's that's a big one. And then even like outside of the healthcare system, the makeup of society in general, like the example that Maggie and I had talked about before we hopped onto the record, was airplanes, right?
Yeah. Airplanes are a big deal. So there's a great podcaster. Her name is Aubrey Gordon. She's an author, podcaster, and for a number of years wrote kind of anonymously under the name Your Fat Friend. And she's gotten 2 books. She has 2 books out now. One of them is called What We Don't Talk About When We Talk About Fat, and the other one is You Just Need to Lose Weight and Other 19 Myths About Weight Loss or Dieting. I can't remember the exact title, but Aubrey Gordon. And her podcast is called Maintenance Phase, because a lot of these diets that are out there, that's sort of the diet culture, they're just, you have this sort of ramp up time, and it's like, oh, this is the most restrictive eating. And then once you get to the maintenance phase, then you'll be great, And so she named she and her partner, Michael Hobbs, named their podcast Maintenance Phase, which I think is just beautiful. And she wrote a great post on Medium about flying while fat. And I've kind of adopted that terminology, and flying while fat is a big deal. And there are a number of things that, I personally go through if I have to get on an airplane, because I don't want to risk getting kicked off. And fat people get kicked off of airplanes all the time. Like, I tell that to people and they're shocked. And I'm going, no, this is real, And Kevin Smith, is a comedian, actor, writer, was probably a most famous example. This is something that literally happened to him, and it's really stress inducing and anxiety inducing. I bought myself my own airplane belt extender, because I'm privileged enough to be able, when I do have to fly, which is rare, I fly maybe once a year, if that. I don't have to travel for work. My livelihood does not depend on it, but imagine if it did. I bought my own belt extender because I didn't want to have to, raise attention with the flight attendants. Like, I didn't want to call attention to myself. It's like, hi, I'm a fat person and I require your assistance. If I have my own belt extender for seats, so I do fly first class, but even those belts aren't long enough. And if I on the rare occasion that I do travel for work, I have to book an economy seat because of budget. So I know that those belts aren't gonna fit me. And I was reminded of a trip that I had to take to Dallas from Philadelphia with my wife, and we were in a first class seat, and the flight was delayed because of weather and all of this kind of, everyone was stressed because we were trying to get out of the airport and there was bad weather at our destination, and I had my belt extender, but I was watching the flight attendants, and there was a lot of conversation between them about another passenger who had asked for a belt extender. And on most flights, the belt extenders are the ones that you use to do the demonstration for safety with. But on this particular flight, the safety demonstration was a video. So they didn't have any on board.
Oh God.
And I'm sitting there and I'm watching this whole thing, and my ears are perked up, and I had kind of resolved in my own mind. I was like, well, if they can't find a belt extender for this person, I'm going to give them mine so that they don't get kicked off this flight because they can't get their seatbelt belted. And I have a first class seat and the belts are a little bit longer and I can probably squish. I can figure it out. And fortunately, everyone was lucky that day. They were able to get belt extenders down to the plane. The passenger was fine. They weren't kicked off. But I had become hyper aware of this situation that didn't even involve me. It was not my situation. But as a fat person, I knew all too well the distress of, oh God, I can't buckle my seatbelt. And if I can't buckle my seatbelt, they might not have any other recourse but to kick me off this plane. And even in the times, when I was thinner and I was younger and I was traveling and the seatbelts were really tight, I was like, well, this is just something that I have to endure. I have to put myself into a painful situation because my body is wrong. And those are the messages that we get as fat people walking around in these bodies everywhere we go, every single day, that we just don't fit. And that's part of the systemic problem, is the world is not built for us. So we are expected and shamed into, it's you that is wrong and not the world. So we're expected to squish into seats that don't fit, squish into belt buckles that don't fit, squish into a world that simply doesn't fit because it's our fault that we're fat, and not, oh no, this is just a natural and normal way to be. And I want to go back to something you said to the listeners about, glorifying obesity. This is something that fat liberators, fat acceptance people, we get this all the time. Oh, you're just glorifying obesity. You're glorifying obesity. So it's such a glorified thing to be thin. Thin people don't have medical problems. Thin people don't have cancer. Right. Thin people don't have diabetes or pancreatitis or any of the other, myriad, don't have heart problems. Come on, it's
right.
It's just a different way of existing. And yeah, I am glorifying obesity because obesity is a term that they made up to say, like, to other people who have larger bodies. That's all it is. It is a medical distinction, but you scratch the surface of medical research out there and you can find that there's no agreement on what the term actually means. There's no agreement on whether having extra fat causes actual harm or increases your risk of anything. there's so much disagreement and so much misinformation and disparity and really poor study designs. And that's one of the things that I love about the Maintenance Phase podcast. I'm not a scientist, but I play one on TV. I work in pharmaceutical advertising, so I read a lot of research, and I have at least some understanding of what makes a good methodology. But Michael Hobbs is really like, he's what he refers to as a methodology queen. And I love that, because they will really dig into why these things are bogus and why the methodologies are flawed and why they don't apply universally. So there's this disconnect between what people think are universal experiences and universal attitudes and then reality.
You know, it's interesting because I started to say that comment about the glorification of it.
Mm-hmm.
And even in saying it, because I'm living through it personally, and even in saying it, I'm like, I'm trying to find that, and just to be honest and real, like I'm trying to find that, like that balance there where I'm like, and I think because society has for so long, and it's so entrenched, even for me walking around as I am, it's so in my head that like catching those thoughts of saying like,
once you start realizing and noticing the messages you're getting every day, you realize how insidious this diet culture is, and how internalized it becomes.
It's and I'll use an example of one of my kids. She's little. She's little. She's a little girl. And last year, I think when she was 5, I'm getting them ready for their bedtime routines, and she's putting her pajamas on. And I could see her kind of like pressing on her stomach, and she's like pressing on her belly. And I was like, "What are you doing, honey? Like, don't do that. You know, you're going to give yourself a bruise or whatever." And she was like, "Oh, I just wish my stomach was flat." And I was like, "What are you talking about?" And she was like, "My friends at school, like their stomachs are flat." And she has, you know, she's a child. She's a little
child tummy. Yeah.
But she already picked up.
She's how old?
She was 5 at the time.
5? Yeah.
She was 5 at the time. And I went to my husband and I was like, you know, I don't want them to be growing up focusing on like the weight, like, or, you know, like that. I don't want any of them, like, and I because I've been focused and struggled my whole life with it. I don't want them to have to deal with that. And even in like how I talk to myself in front of the kids, like we're very like mindful of it. Like my husband will make like says in front of them like, "Oh, my kids call them like my chumpy chumps," like because and that's how they call it. And they're like, "Oh, Bobby loves mommy's chumpy chumps," and that's how they like, because we're trying to like get them to see like, you know, mommy's healthy, mommy eats healthy. This is just mommy. Yeah, like this is just mommy. Mommy goes to the gym. Mommy eats healthy, but this is just mommy. That's it. Yeah. Yeah, there's nothing negative, positive. It just is what it is.
Body neutrality. It's, you know, and and that's one of the most important things I think people can practice for themselves and for other people is just don't comment. Don't comment on other people's bodies, you know, especially, and it can start with, you know, I think there's the place that I think it started for me is listening to people talk about celebrity bodies. You know, that's something that is so pervasive. And even, you know, before internet culture, you know, you would watch these awards shows. I was like, oh, she looks stunning and look at her dress. And you're seeing all of these exemplars of women who are not realistic, you know, and it's like, this is not what a standard person looks like.
No friggin' way.
No, you know, you have to, and it's difficult, but when you take a step back and you go, this is a person who has the privilege of having unlimited access to foods of all different kinds, of a huge variety of foods, may or may not have someone who is cooking for them personally on a regular basis, probably has a personal trainer who's working with them many hours a day. This is someone who has the time and ability to put into looking like this, because that is part of their industry. It's not for regular people. No. You know, this is not a thing. So yeah, for me as a fat person, I've had to come to a place where I move my body in a way that is joyful for me. I don't exercise to punish my body or to earn a food that I like. I just
Right. Oh God.
eat because I need to eat, and I eat the things that I
Right.
like. Life is too short. Eat the cake. Buy the shoes, wear the dress. Do all of the things that bring you enjoyment. So if we have learned anything from the last several years being in the pandemic, life is difficult and it is hard and it is short. And please, like, be kind to yourself in all of the ways. So yeah, it's been much more important for me to be strong, to work on my mobility, so that I can do the things that I want to do. And that's where it ends for me. And it's been difficult for me to train myself to stop wholesale, period, end of sentence, stop talking about other people's bodies. And when you do that, it's like as soon as you cut back on something, like I cut back on my salt intake for my own reasons. And then I started to notice how salty foods were. I was like, this is blah, blah. This is a lot of salt in it. It's the same thing. You stop talking about other people's bodies, and then you start noticing how often other people are talking about other people's bodies. And it's almost always women talking about other women. And that's really insidious. It's really insidious. And it seems to be like part of the culture of women is like, oh, well, we'll talk about the dress, or talk about, oh, she's not wearing enough clothes, or this, that, or the other thing. And it's this constant stream of judgment about how we look compared to the women we see around us, and making a moral judgment about how good or bad that person is based on those things. And it can be crazy making. It absolutely is the kind of thing that I try to shut down as soon as I possibly can. So I don't want to hear it.
I just had an interesting conversation earlier today on the similar vein of like how women treat each other. And what's interesting too is like, even like on a professional note, like there have been times where I've said like, I prefer to work with a male supervisor, just because female supervisors, in my experience, I'm not saying it's all of us, but in my experience at that point in time, I was like, I've had female supervisor after female supervisor that just tore me down and like just wouldn't let me succeed. And no matter what I did under them, it just didn't matter. They just always had like a checklist of like Jenny-isms that went wrong. And I'm like, I don't understand. Like, why aren't you supposed to be supporting me into my next phase of my career? The only times that happened was when I worked under male supervision. Now, outside of that, like supervisor level and professional level role, like even like, socially, like you'll have women that, some women they get intimidated by each other. Like they're not going to support each other. They like to get catty and just like, talk and this and that. And it's consistently like a society of like, we need to tear each other down in order for like one person to be pulled up. And I see it so prevalent amongst like all of us. And it's like, why? We don't need to do that. There is enough for all of us. Like, we don't need to be responding to each other in that way.
It's not pie. I mean, there's
yes, exactly.
Is a great phrase. And anybody should use this phrase. It's wonderful. There's things like this is not a finite, and it just means it's not a finite resource. Success is not a finite resource. Everybody can find success on their own, in their own ways. And you have to define what success means for you. For me, success means happiness in my marriage, making sure my cats are okay, and finding some fulfillment in my employment, being able to pursue my passion projects. That's success for me. And I've been lucky enough in my, so far short period of time that I've been able to achieve that. It's not about how much money I make or what my title is or, any of these other kind of superficial things. And that's what I think, the whole like body positivity, fat acceptance movement is also trying to kind of instill, is that, other people's definitions of success shouldn't apply to you, and whatever you think is successful is what it should be. And if that means that your life is enhanced by using an assistive device, use the assistive device. I like I said earlier, I have mobility issues. I have chronic pain and arthritis everywhere. So if I know that I'm going to be in a situation where I'm going to be standing or walking for a long period of time, I use an assistive device because that's how I can access the world. And it took me an extraordinarily long time to allow myself to do that and to not feel shame about it. The first time I go to a big sci-fi convention, shout out Dragon Con. It's in Atlanta over Labor Day weekend every year, and it's a gathering of 80,000 of my closest friends. It takes place over 5 hotels in downtown Atlanta for 4 to 5 days, depending on when you get there, basically. It's a 24/7 convention. It is intense and crazy, and I love it. And like wild dogs couldn't keep me away. But the first time I went with my assistive device, I was so nervous and so worried about how was I going to get around? How was I going to access everything that I wanted to access? Because it's 80,000 people, and it's not a lot of elevators, and having to cut, and everybody wants to get somewhere kind of at the exact same time. So I had all of the pathways of, I have to take this escalator to this level and this escalator over here, and I'll take those stairs down to the street and go across and da-da-da. I knew how to get everywhere in like record time using my feet. But now I had wheels.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh no, how is this going to go? And I was thrilled with the response of the Dragon Con community. Again, shout out to Dragon Con, because they made a path for me. And they said, oh, and there's kind of an official and unofficial policy. Like if you have an assistive device and you need to get on an elevator, people should make way for you. The people who are able-bodied and can use the stairs should, if there's a glut of people, trying to get on an elevator. But human nature, you're trying to get somewhere. You're not always aware of everyone around you. You're not always aware. You're not thinking about the other person. You're focused on where you need to get. So I really thought I was going to have to fight to get to where I needed to be. And time again, people made room for me. And it was so unexpected. And I hate that it was unexpected. That's the way it should be. If we make room for each other, when we are aware of the needs of someone else, it just makes everyone's experience better. So when I'm on a couple of different chat communities about the convention, and I volunteer for the convention. So often this question comes up. It's like, if I feel like I need an assistive device, should I use it? Yes. And there's a whole disability services department of the convention that is there to help you access the entire convention and make sure that you are safe and well and comfortable. So if you're someone who can't stand outside in Atlanta heat for several hours waiting to get into a panel, there's an accommodation for you. There's an accommodation for people who are using scooters. There's an accommodation for people who are hearing impaired or sight impaired, and leading up to the convention, usually in the month or two ahead of time, the disability services channels that I am involved in flooded with questions. Should I get this accommodation? Should I get this? Yeah, you should.
Yeah,
if you think you need it, get it, because it's only going to make your world better. And you shouldn't, let everyone work on your internalized shame of needing that, because for whatever reason, especially, I feel like it might be a uniquely American thing, but we're expected to just like push through and not need help and do the things for yourself. It's like, well, my legs are broken and I need crutches. Like, that's not my fault. Right. My legs don't work that great and I can't stand for long periods of time. But because I'm fat, it's judgment. It's immediately like, oh, she's in this situation because she did this to herself.
I was actually just going to say that to you. Yeah. That I think like at the core belief, and I will admit, and I will say this out loud, like I still am trying to break that out of my head. The core belief is, well, that's because you're not doing anything to help yourself.
Right. Yeah.
That's really what it is. That's where the judgment comes from, is that
100%.
it's like you're doing nothing. This is your fault. And I remember when I was a couple years back, I was honestly trying to address it, because I was getting to a point personally where I felt like I was so like uncomfortable and just so unhappy with like how I physically was after I had my kids, and I gained weight and everything. I started seeking help from medical professionals, to talk to nutritionists and all this stuff, because I was like, I'm at my wit's end. I can't handle this anymore. Like, I need help. And one of the doctors said to me, I met with the medical doctor first, and he was going to partner with me with a nutritionist, because I actually did have very like skewed views on food. So I was like, I need to really educate myself here. And before he let me go with the nutritionist, he just talked to me for a little bit, and he said to me, he was like, I want you to know, he was like, this is not your fault. And I was like, oh. And he just kind of like left it out there as like, I know you're carrying this. This is not your fault.
Mm-hmm.
And it like blew me away that I needed to hear that, and that he even like thought to say it.
Yeah, that's incredible. And that's wonderful that you had that experience. I mean, it is that is the judgment, we've been conditioned to believe that fatness is a moral failing, and that fat people are lazy, slothful. We're generally seen as uneducated. And it's a caricature, right? It's, and it goes back
Oh,
millennia, it feels like, but it goes all the way back to political cartoons of, fat cats and people who are getting, consuming, just taking and taking and taking away from everybody else. And it's just so fallacious. And the reality is you have no idea what is going on with any individual person at any time, and I have personally had the experience of more than once of people giving me unsolicited medical advice about, oh, you should do this, you should lose weight for this reason, you should do, and I'm like, no, you're not my medical doctor, and you are not the fat whisperer. Especially, I'm 44 years old. Do you really think you're the first person to tell me I should lose weight?
You're like, shocking. No one's ever said that before.
Really, nobody has ever told me about keto before. Wow. Nobody's ever told me about Atkins before. You're a miracle worker. I mean, it just makes me want to,
I'm aware. Like,
I'm aware. Like, I want to slam my head into things. Because it's just, you don't know anything about me. You don't have any idea how I live my life. And I am not your fit inspiration. Like, please do not approach me in the gym and tell me that I am encouraging you to work harder. Because your fear...
I would be annoyed if somebody said that. I would be really annoyed.
And don't walk up to me. And I actually was leaving the gym recently. I was with my wife. She and I go together. And I was approached by this completely random woman in the parking lot who saw that I was in like my workout gear, and I had my water bottle, and I was sweaty. I was like, clearly had just finished my workout. And she made a beeline for me across the parking lot, and she's like, oh, did you just come from the gym? And I said, yeah. It's like, oh, good for you, that's so great that you're taking care of yourself. And I went, thank you very much, have a nice day, and got in my car, because I just, no, don't, like, really, why are you talking to me about this? It's ridiculous. And that's every day. That can be something like, I'm always kind of hyper aware of like who's around me. It's like, no, don't approach me, because I don't want to hear about your fear of looking like me. People's greatest fears are about having a body that looks like mine, and that is debilitating. It is truly, truly a debilitating thing, and it can make you feel like you cannot go out in public. And it was, I was particularly aware of it right at the beginning of the pandemic, as everything was shutting down, and a lot of people who access the gym every day were like, oh no, what am I going to do? I'm going to gain so much weight because I can't go to the gym. And there were memes upon memes upon memes of like day 1 of the quarantine, it was like a really fit, it was like Jason Momoa. And then like day 30 of the quarantine, and it was like Hagrid from Harry Potter. And I'm like, no, stop with this.
Yeah.
Well, let's do more false equivalence. But like, let's see how stupid this is.
Well, it's also really like, while the intention is like, oh, it's like, ha, and I probably would have laughed at it too, to be honest with you.
I laughed.
But at the same time, it's like, gosh, but like, you're really saying that this is like the bad, like,
this is the worst thing that could happen.
It's the worst thing that could happen to you.
And like, granted, this was early, and we didn't necessarily know like how bad it was going to get, and that like hundreds of thousands and millions of people were going to die.
Yeah.
But, like, you take your privilege, please, because your greatest fear of this shutdown is your body might look like mine at the end.
Yeah.
Not, I might lose my job. I have food insecurity. I might lose my house. I have to expose myself to a deadly virus that nobody knows anything about and for which there is no vaccine because I am an essential employee and I have to continue to work. Like, wow. Wow. You are so far down the path. Like, your body image issues are like number 1,000 on the list of terrible things that are going on. So I think it did make a lot of people suddenly aware of like the pervasiveness. And as we've started to kind of come out of the pandemic, I am seeing more and more voices that are fighting against fat bias. I'm seeing more media and more celebrities who are kind of addressing this issue. There's a great show on National Geographic called what's it called? It's Jeff Jenkins, and I think it's called Travel Diaries. Jeff Jenkins on Instagram goes by Chubby Diaries, and he is a travel journalist. He is a fat black man. And this series, he literally went all over the world and did things that you would not think that a fat man would have access to. And he's like, look, I'm doing them anyway. I'm fat and I'm doing them anyway. And that's the key. It's like, I should have access to all of these things. I should get to have these amazing experiences. It doesn't matter my size. The only thing holding me back is me. And that was so powerful. And that's, that came out in the last year. And I think it was like 6 or 8 episodes on streaming. And it was just like, oh, this is a revelation. This is something that I could be like, why am I holding myself back, to keep from having these kinds of experiences because of fear and of fear how other people will respond to me.
That was incredibly well said. I looked it up while you were talking. Watch Never Say Never with Jeff Jenkins.
Jeff Jenkins, yeah.
And it's all over. I just Googled Jeff Jenkins travel, and it's, amazing comments that I like, and it's just like at a glance that I'm looking at. I think that like in a lot of other episodes, I talk about like the unfortunate situation we find ourselves in where we're trying to fit into a particular mold just across the board in general. But even in this instance, it applies to that because it seems to be that there's just this one acceptable form. Yeah. And that's what, and I'll admit, like, I have that in my head, and I myself struggle in trying to maintain like no, I'm proud of myself. I love me. But then also like, do I really? And it's like an ongoing, do I really? Oh. And it's an ongoing struggle. And like, I have my moments. I'm human where I'm like judging myself and I'm like, oh God, I'm like, I wish I looked better. I wish I was slimmer. I wish that I didn't have this child flap situation that I've got from having my kids. Like,
yeah, let's not get it twisted. Like, I have that. I am a fat liberationist, and it's like, I have my days where it's just like, oh, I feel so X about myself, and I'm on a medication that has allowed me, or has kind of forced me to lose some weight. And I had really struggled with getting those messages from people, that validation It's like, oh, you look great. Oh, what have you been doing? You look great. And I'm like, ooh, I like the validation, but I
know,
hate
it's very
why.
hard.
Why are you? No, oh no, So like, but I'm never gonna be thin. I'm never gonna be thin. I'm never gonna look
No.
like I'm just not. It's just not in my DNA. It's not. I mean, my mother was fat. Her father was fat. We're a fat family. It's just how we are, and it's just something that I'm like, all right, this is how I exist, and this is fine, and this is exactly who I'm supposed to be, and it's okay, and it's not only okay, but it's great, and it's celebrated. But yeah, we all go through that, and I think especially as women, I don't know that men necessarily get this message as consistently about you should look this way. This is how you should look. And, the number of women's magazines that are talking about the latest color palette and fashion and don't wear this, wear that kinds of things. Like it's every minute. It feels like every minute of every day. And I said to my wife just this morning, actually, I had kind of a revelation because I am embracing kind of this gender nonconforming pathway. My pronouns are she, they. And by embracing that, I'm freeing myself from performative femininity. I don't have to try to conform to some ideal of feminine presentation because I'm not. I'm a they. So I can express myself and present myself any which way, a little more masculine, a little more feminine, a combination of both. Like I can wear a flannel and full face makeup. And that fits for me because I don't have to try to squish myself into a mold that I will never fit. That I will never fit.
And I think a lot of stuff gets like, because of social media, I think because a lot of things get like so like put out there, or not like so, but there's so much, and there's a lot of voices, and it's a lot of back and forth, and then you have like the people who are totally against, the people who are on board, and there's a lot of noise. But in the end, it's really just, and maybe I'm simplifying it too much, Maggie, and you just correct me because I appreciate it, but I feel like we really just need to be living our authentic lives. Yes. Who are you? Who am I authentically meant to be? And let me lean into that. What is making me the happiest that I can be? And I'm going to lean into that. And like that's really where, like, in my head, I always drill down to that, because I'm like, but shouldn't we just give each other the space to exist? And, that's it.
I am this meme right now. Like,
that's it. Like, I mean, that is like the simple. I was gonna say, I know I'm like really oversimplifying, but I'm like, that's how it is in my head.
It boils like there's all sorts of layers of complexity on achieving that, but that's the absolute goal for sure. And that's the same thing. Women, gay people, queer people, fat people, living authentically and having the freedom to do that is one of the things that contributes to happiness. And that is just true. I mean, you look at it, especially, I think it's been well studied the most in LGBTQ plus communities and spaces where, especially for trans people, when trans people get to transition, whether socially or medically, and they are supported by the people around them, the rates of suicide drop off a cliff. Is the people who aren't allowed to live their lives as who they are, that are at risk of self-harm, that are at risk of hate crimes perpetuated against them, and who are at risk of depression and all sorts of other badness. So time and time again, it's like, if you get to live your life the way that you want to live it, chances are you're going to be fine. And that's how I've tried to go kind of through life. I was unfortunately, I lost my mother when she was 66 years old. She had a heart attack, and I have thought about that a lot because she was a weight cycler, and she and I went on diets together, and we, it was this whole mother-daughter bonding of like, we should do this, let's do this together, we'll support each other. Okay, sure. And over a period of time, she lost and gained like over 100 pounds. And I didn't know this until after she had passed, but she had been on Nutrisystem before her death. And that was I can't say for sure, like I can't lay it at the feet of Nutrisystem, obviously, but it was a contributing factor. You know, the fact that she was starving herself in order to lose weight because she felt she had to for her own reasons. And I'm still angry about it because she did everything, quote unquote, right. She went on the diet, she lost the weight, she exercised, she ate right, she did all the things, and she died anyway.
Yeah.
And that is the lie that the diet industry is selling everyone. Do these things and you'll be happy. Well, will you? If you are doing this and you're denying yourself and you're contributing to your own disordered eating, so I'm no longer sure.
Right.
And that's the message that if I can get anything across to the listeners out there, that's what I want to say is examine this for yourself. Examine how you feel, and are you living your authentic life to the fullest? Or are you letting outside forces and an industry that does not care about you and only wants your money to hold you back?
That was really well put.
Thank you.
That's why I was like, I'm going to pause because she is going for it. And I'm just going to.
I've spent a lot of time, as you can imagine, I've spent a lot of time thinking about these things.
Honestly, it was really well put. I really, for the listeners who are listening to this, I know we jumped around a little bit today, but like what Maggie said was really on point here, and just living that authentic life and really being yourself and just leading into that, forget the mold that society is putting there.
Yeah.
How do you want to show up? And just, that's really where you're going to find your center. You're going to find your joy there. Like, that's when you're really going to start to feel like you.
There's a great quote, and we're getting close to time. I'm sure you want to start wrapping it up, but I'll leave everyone with this, a great quote by Tim Gunn of Project Runway fame. I cannot control how I am perceived, but I can control how I am presented. And that boils down to the reactions of the people who are around you. That's their problem. What is your problem? What you can do about it is presenting yourself to the world the way you want to be presented. And leave the rest to everybody else. Like, that's a you problem. I'm awesome.
That quote is amazing. I love that. I literally was like scrambling it down as you were saying it. Maggie, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, it was truly, truly amazing. I'm so happy we got to like chat and connect on this. Listeners, thank you so much for listening, joining the call today. And, I'm going to include links. Maggie mentioned a few different resources and websites and people. I'm going to include links in the description of the podcast so you can access all those folks as well if you want to do any additional research on your own. Maggie, thank you again.
Thank you so much.